Welcome to the Deep Dive. You've sent us a fascinating collection of articles exploring something I know you've been thinking a lot about: the relationship between computers and creativity.
And it's a relationship that immediately brings up some contrasting ideas, doesn't it?
Mm,
On one hand, you have the notion of computers as these purely logical machines, just crunching numbers and following algorithms, kind of the very antithesis of free-flowing creative thought.
exactly. The argument is that because they operate step by step, they can only really support, uncreative thinking. But then, on the other hand, there's this growing recognition of computers as incredibly powerful tools. Tools that are being used to fuel creative work across all sorts of fields, from making art and music to writing, even scientific discovery.
So our goal as we delve into these sources you provided is really understand how computers can become facilitators of creativity. We want to move beyond that simple question of whether they do or don't and explore the specific ways they can have an impact.
And we've already come across a really key insight that I think is crucial to understanding this whole picture. It turns out that the kind of computer software being used, and particularly how it's used in education, well, that's what makes all the difference. Here's where it gets really interesting. Research has looked at what they called non-developmental software. Think of those really structured drill and practice programs where the computer dictates
Like
everything.
rote stuff.
Yeah, versus developmental software, which gives the child more control and presents more open-ended situations.
Interestingly, one study found that children who were primarily using that non-developmental software actually experienced a significant drop in their creativity scores, a decrease of about 50%.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the impact of those kinds of rigid digital interactions.
50%, that's a massive difference. But the encouraging news is that the children using the developmental software didn't show that decline at all. In fact, they even showed positive changes in various areas of their thinking. So it's clearly not about the computer itself being inherently uncreative, but about, well, how we design and use these digital tools.
Precisely. And looking at the materials you've shared, we see a real focus on a few areas where computers have shown particular promise in nurturing creativity.
Yeah.
Computer programming, especially using the language Logo, word processing, and different kinds of design tools.
Wow.
So let's start by unpacking Logo.
Okay, Logo. For those who might not have encountered it, it's a computer language that was specifically designed to be user-friendly for both kids and adults. It's often introduced through something called turtle graphics. Imagine a little turtle on your screen that you can give commands to tell it to move forward, turn right, and as it moves, it draws a line. You can build up all sorts of geometric shapes and other drawings by giving it sequences of these instructions. It's a very visual and interactive way to learn about programming.
Now, when Logo first came onto the scene, it did face some initial skepticism. One concern was whether it was really appropriate for children's development. The thinking was, what does it mean for a child to be able to command the computer to draw a perfect circle when they can't even draw a decent one by hand?
Right, yeah.
There were also questions about whether engaging with the computer through these logical, almost mathematical commands was somehow, well, counter to more traditional free-flowing artistic expression.
Right. It felt a bit like trying to engineer creativity rather than letting it emerge naturally. But the early research actually started to challenge those initial criticisms. It turned out that for many children, using Logo actually allowed them to create pictures that were more complex and detailed than what they could achieve with just paper and pencil.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the act of creating these images on the screen seemed to spark new ideas and even led them to try out those new ideas when they went back to drawing on paper. So the digital seemed to feed back into the physical.
It's interesting that this wasn't just observed in older children. Studies showed that even 3-year-olds working with Logo demonstrated progress in their drawing skills and their understanding of basic geometric concepts. It suggests that the abstract nature of the commands can, surprisingly, provide a different kind of support for visual thinking at a very early age.
And it wasn't just about observing what the kids were doing. Several early studies actually tried to measure something called figural creativity, basically creativity expressed in drawings after children had spent time using Logo. And many of these studies reported increases in those creativity scores.
So,
Some researchers even noted that students using Logo seemed to develop their graphic compositions more fully, making them more complete, original, and even showing more individual style in their drawings. One study with fourth graders found that their Logo creations were rated significantly higher in originality compared to projects they did using standard word processing and graphic software.
now, most of these initial studies relied on tests like the Torrance test of creative thinking. in its figural form. And this raises an important question. Were these positive effects just limited to drawing skills, or was logo actually having a broader impact on more general creative thinking processes that might apply in different areas?
That's a really insightful point to consider. To really understand how logo might be influencing creativity, researchers started to look at different theories of how creative thinking works. One theory that proved particularly useful was Sternberg's information processing theory. He basically suggests that when we solve problems, including creative ones, we use different kinds of mental processes. Two of these are really key for creativity, what he called metacomponents and knowledge acquisition components.
So meta components are like the control center of our thinking, the high-level executive functions.
Hmm.
This includes things like defining the problem we're trying to solve, deciding which strategies to use, keeping track of how we're doing, and knowing when we've reached a solution.
Right.
Knowledge acquisition components, on the other hand, are all about how we learn new things. This involves selectively picking out the important information, finding ways to combine different pieces of knowledge, and connecting new information to what we already know.
And to make this a bit more concrete, there's a great example involving kids using logo to draw a baseball. They might start by drawing a circle, that's their initial idea, but then they look at it and realize it doesn't quite look like a real baseball. That's the monitoring part, a meta component in action.
Okay. And
Then one of them might wonder if they could add the stitching. That involves selectively focusing on that key detail of a baseball and then comparing it to their current drawing. They then have to figure out how to represent those stitches using the logo commands they know, maybe using arcs and lines that's selecting and combining those basic logo commands in a new way, a knowledge acquisition component.
what's really interesting is that research suggests that working in logo environments seems to really encourage the development and use of these meta components and knowledge acquisition components. Studies have shown that children working with logo actually demonstrate a greater use of these higher-level thinking skills, and perhaps even more importantly, there's evidence that these improved skills can transfer to tasks that have nothing to do with computers at all.
So it's not just about being a better logo programmer, it's about becoming a better thinker.
Exactly.
It sounds like logo provides this really fertile ground for those underlying creative thinking processes to develop and strengthen. Plus, logo gives you this really direct control over the individual elements of what you're creating. As the saying goes, variation on a theme is often key to creativity, and logo offers these very clear and explicit ways to isolate and manipulate different aspects of your design. It's a very concrete and hands-on way of developing cognitive control.
And the psychologist Woolwell suggested that this kind of clear, reasoned control, where you can see the direct impact of your actions, is actually particularly well suited for fostering creativity in children, especially those who are still in the stage of development where they tend to approach things through concrete problem solving rather than purely abstract or emotional expression.
Now, we also know that our feelings and motivations play a big role in creativity, right? People tend to be more creative when they're intrinsically motivated, driven by their own interest and enjoyment rather than by external rewards.
Absolutely.
And again, logo seems to foster this kind of intrinsic motivation. Children working in logo environments often become very self-directed. They show real pleasure in making discoveries and figuring things out, and they generally feel like they're in control of what they're doing. That sense of agency seems really important.
However, it's crucial to acknowledge some of the limitations of that early body of research. As we touched on, the heavy reliance on those figural creativity tests meant there was always a question of whether the observed improvements were simply due to children having more experience talking about visual forms within the logo environment, which could lead to richer visual and verbal associations that help them on those specific drawing tests.
That's a really insightful point. If kids are constantly describing shapes and movements on the screen and seeing the visual results, it makes sense that their ability to come up with creative visual ideas might improve almost as a side effect of learning logo. So to address this directly, some researchers started to design studies that assessed not only figural creativity, but also verbal creativity after children had experience with logo.
And the findings from these later studies were quite compelling. While the logo groups did indeed outperform the control groups on measures of figural creativity, they also showed significant gains in verbal creativity. This suggested that logo wasn't just making them better at drawing, it was actually having a broader impact on those underlying cognitive processes that contribute to creativity in different domains.
Interesting.
Yeah, though the figural gains were generally more pronounced.
Okay. Interestingly, the specific aspect of creativity that seemed to be most consistently and positively affected by logo across different studies was originality, that ability to come up with novel and unique ideas. Fluency, generating a large number of ideas, and flexibility, shifting between different categories of ideas, showed more moderate effects, possibly because those might be more closely tied to specific experiences within the visual domain of logo.
What's particularly noteworthy about originality is that it's thought to rely quite heavily on those selective encoding and combining processes we talked about earlier, being able to pick out unique pieces of information and put them together in new and unexpected ways.
Right.
Fluency and flexibility, on the other hand, might benefit more from having a broad base of existing knowledge and associations. So, the logo experience seems to be particularly effective at sparking that element of newness in thinking.
So, to summarize this part of our deep dive, Logo provides this really explicit control over variables, allowing kids to experiment in a structured way, and it also implicitly encourages the use of those higher level thinking processes that are so important for creativity. It might even help children overcome some of the limitations of traditional creative media that don't offer that same kind of immediate feedback and cognitive control.
And the implications for education are really significant. Logo appears to be a genuinely effective environment for fostering both visual and, to a slightly lesser degree, verbal creativity. But here's a crucial point. The research also strongly indicates that the teacher plays an absolutely vital role in making this happen.
Ah, yes.
Studies that showed logo having a less significant impact often involved teachers who took a very hands-off approach, what's been called the exposure hypothesis, where it's assumed that simply giving students access to logo is enough.
Right. It's like saying, here's the software, go have fun and be creative, which doesn't always work.
Exactly. But the studies that did demonstrate positive results consistently involved what they called the mediated conceptual framework hypothesis. This emphasizes the critical role of the teacher in actively guiding the learning process, helping students to extend their ideas, focusing their attention on the creative process itself, and encouraging them to reflect on what they're doing and why.
So it's active guidance.
Yeah, this mediation can take many forms. Teachers might explicitly point out the creative possibilities within logo. They might help students build on the ideas they come up with, draw their attention to important aspects of their work, use the computer's feedback to spark new lines of thinking, provide just enough structure to guide their explorations without stifling their own ideas, and constantly prompt them to think metacognitively, to think about their own thinking.
It really highlights that technology, no matter how powerful it might seem, is ultimately just a tool. It's the teacher who shapes how that tool is used and ultimately determines whether it truly unlocks a student's creative potential. It's not just about putting kids in front of a computer with logo. It's about creating a rich and supportive learning environment around it.
Now, it's important to come back to that persistent issue. Many of these studies on creativity still relied on those creativity tests that primarily assess divergent production, the ability to generate a wide range of ideas. Some argue that these tests don't fully capture the richness and complexity of what we mean by creativity in real-world situations.
However, a number of studies did go beyond those standardized tests and directly looked at the actual creative projects that children produced using logo. And these more in-depth evaluations largely support the idea that logo is indeed effective in fostering creativity in a broader and more meaningful sense. And this positive influence isn't just limited to the visual and verbal domains. Let's turn our attention to how logo can also play a role in fostering mathematical creativity, which might seem a bit surprising to some.
That's right. When most people think about mathematics, the word creative doesn't immediately spring to mind. But this is a view that's not only common, but also one that educational reformers are actively trying to change. The idea is that learning math should involve actively creating mathematical knowledge and understanding, not just passively memorizing rules and procedures.
And while the body of research specifically on logo's impact on mathematical creativity isn't quite as extensive as it is in the visual domain, the observational evidence we have is really quite compelling. We're talking about instances like a 4-year-old independently discovering that telling the logo turtle to reverse and move backward achieves the exact same outcome as simply telling it to move forward.
Wow.
And the genuine excitement and sense of accomplishment that child experienced with that discovery.
What's fascinating here is how logo can act as a bridge, helping children to abstract these mathematical ideas from their concrete visual experiences. Another example involved first-grade students who recognized that the patterns they were creating visually in logo were similar to the patterns they had previously built using physical math manipulatives. They then started to creatively incorporate these mathematical patterns into their artwork. It's like Logo makes abstract math more tangible and playful.
Exactly. It acts as this interactive link between abstract mathematical concepts and visual representations that kids can actually manipulate and experiment with. There's also the story of a primary grade teacher who noticed that her students, who were generally considered below average in math after working with Logo, suddenly started recognizing patterns in multiplication tables and even using the Logo repeat command to describe those patterns, something she said had never happened before in her teaching experience.
And it's not just in the early grades. Observations of middle school students working with Logo suggest that it can allow them to explore certain mathematical concepts much earlier than they are typically introduced in the curriculum, leading to a much deeper level of engagement and understanding. As one student eloquently put it, "I've thought about circles in ways I've never considered before." That kind of deep personal connection to a mathematical idea is a hallmark of creative thinking.
And in these logo-based learning environments, the level of mathematical discussion and collaboration among students often far surpasses what you typically see in a more traditional math classroom. They experience the power of creating and controlling their own approaches to solving mathematical problems.
This really points to the potential of fully integrating Logo into the mathematics curriculum. Instead of endless worksheets filled with rote exercises, Logo can provide a dynamic environment where students actively create mathematical ideas, explore relationships, and test their own conjectures. The Logo language becomes a tool they can use to symbolize, manipulate, and understand mathematical concepts in a much more intuitive and engaging way.
It shifts the focus, as the educational theorist Papert famously said, from teaching about mathematics to teaching children to be mathematicians, to think mathematically and creatively. And this aligns perfectly with the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics' call for students to be active participants in creating their own mathematical knowledge. So, Logo isn't just a tool for drawing pictures, it can be a surprisingly powerful catalyst for fostering creative mathematical thinking.
Okay, now let's shift our focus from the world of programming to another very common computer application, word processing and its impact on creative writing.
Okay, word processing. We all use it every day, but how does it actually affect our creativity when we're writing? Well, the research shows some pretty consistent benefits, especially for younger writers. Children who use word processors tend to write more in terms of length, they make fewer mechanical errors like typos and misspellings, and perhaps most importantly, they seem to experience less anxiety about making mistakes.
That reduced fear of errors is a really significant factor, I think. It frees up valuable mental energy that can then be directed towards the more imaginative and expressive aspects of writing. While the findings on the overall quality of writing are a bit more nuanced, they generally lean towards the positive.
And what's particularly interesting is how word processors can support a more exploratory and constructive approach to writing, especially for younger children who are still developing their literacy skills. For example, research has shown that primary grade children often feel more comfortable inventing their own spellings when they're working on a computer, whereas with paper and pencil, they might be more hesitant and just produce random letters. There's a playfulness that the digital environment seems to encourage.
That playful experimentation with language seems to be key. And in preschool and kindergarten, using word processing has been linked to a higher level of awareness of the different elements of text and a better understanding of the writing process itself. Things like thinking about what you want to say before you actually start typing. The computer environment, because it feels less permanent than handwriting, seems to encourage this more exploratory and adventurous approach to writing.
And word processors can be particularly beneficial for students who face challenges with writing, for children with learning disabilities that affect their writing, or for students who are learning English as a second language. Word processors can provide crucial support. For instance, children with significant spelling difficulties tend to make fewer errors with spell check, and those who are primarily focused on just getting the mechanics right often find they can write longer and more complex stories when those mechanical hurdles are reduced.
The reason word processors are so helpful in fostering creative writing seems to be this idea of providing what we call scaffolding. By minimizing the burden of those mechanical concerns like handwriting and spelling, it allows children to focus on the core purpose of writing, to communicate their ideas and express themselves creatively.
Right, gets the roadblocks out of the way.
Exactly. Plus, word processors really convey the idea that text is fluid and flexible. It's easy to revise, rearrange paragraphs, and experiment with different phrasing without having to completely rewrite everything, which is absolutely crucial for creative writing. You're much more likely to take risks and try out new ideas when you know you can easily undo mistakes and play around with the text.
And it's not just about the individual writer. The use of computers in the classroom for writing can also foster collaboration and create new social dynamics. Students can easily share their work with each other, provide feedback, and work together on writing projects in ways that are often more cumbersome with traditional methods.
But just as we saw with Logo, the teacher's role in establishing the right environment for word processing is absolutely paramount. Teachers set the stage for how these tools are used. Do they encourage solitary work or collaborative projects? Do they emphasize a rigid, linear approach to writing or a more flexible, recursive one where students go back and forth between planning, drafting, and revising?
Right.
The word processor itself can certainly enhance a supportive learning environment, but it doesn't create that environment on its own.
So it sounds like the real power of word processing for nurturing creative writing is unleashed when it's thoughtfully integrated into process-oriented writing programs with active guidance and support from the teacher. Teachers need to explicitly show students how to view text as something that can be easily manipulated and revised, and how to engage in deep and meaningful revisions. And it's also important for educators to be discerning in their choice of software, avoiding programs that might inadvertently stifle individuality and exploration.
Absolutely. Technology can be a powerful amplifier of good teaching, but it will amplify whatever pedagogical approach is already in place. Now let's move beyond individual applications like programming and word processing and explore the broader category of design, art, and other computer-based creative tools.
This is where things get really interesting in terms of seeing how creativity can be connected to learning in all sorts of different subject areas. Using computers for composition, whether it's writing, drawing, or creating multimedia projects, can be a fantastic way for students to learn about science and other topics in a very active way. It beautifully brings together creativity and constructivism, where students are actively building your own knowledge and understanding through reading, writing, and designing.
We've seen examples of researchers working with children who used a variety of computer creativity tools, word processors, drawing programs, even email as part of projects designed to help them develop a much deeper understanding of complex science concepts. As they tried to articulate causal explanations and create compelling digital documents to share their learning, their own comprehension of the underlying science grew significantly.
And then there's CSILE, the computer-supported intentional learning environments. This is a really fascinating example of how technology can support students in collaboratively building shared knowledge using a networked system. Think of it almost like a shared digital notebook or a collaborative workspace where students can create notes containing information, their own ideas, questions they have, and add them to a database that everyone in the class can access and contribute to.
What's particularly powerful about CSIL is how it encourages a dynamic process of debate and refinement of ideas. Students can search and retrieve notes based on keywords, and teachers actively encourage them to engage with each other's contributions, to challenge ideas, and to build upon what others have shared.
Like a shared brain, almost.
Kind of. It's been implemented across a wide range of grade levels and subject areas, and the results have been impressive, showing gains not just in writing quality, but also in students' ability to ask insightful questions, set and pursue their own learning goals, and even in their language and graphics skills.
Mm.
And crucially, it fosters a real sense of the classroom as a community where everyone is actively involved in building knowledge together.
It's like they're not just passively receiving information from the teacher or a textbook, they're actively contributing to and shaping the collective understanding of the topic. And taking this idea of student agency a step further, we have examples of projects where students aren't just using existing software, but they're actually involved in designing the software or the digital artifact themselves.
Exactly. They might be tasked with creating interactive documentaries, designing virtual museum exhibits, or even developing teaching tools that their peers can use. One compelling example involved middle school students who were designing hypermedia documents about American history. This kind of complex undertaking, while it can be challenging to assess using traditional methods, has been shown to significantly boost student motivation and effort, and it really demonstrates their capacity to handle the multiple demands of a truly creative production. They have to think about content, design, and how the user will interact with their creation.
And Logo makes another appearance here. We've seen examples of fourth grade students using Logo to design their own computer programs specifically aimed at teaching third graders about fractions. These students not only had to figure out how to make the program work technically, but in doing so, they deepened their own understanding of fractions, programming logic, and instructional design. Interestingly, this group even outperformed other students on tests of fraction knowledge.
What's so insightful is how these students had to reformulate their own understanding of fractions in order to explain them effectively to someone else through the medium of a computer program. They became much more flexible in their approaches to problem solving related to fractions. We've also seen examples of students using Logo to design their own computer games about fractions, creatively incorporating storytelling and game mechanics to make learning more engaging for their peers.
And going back to that study we mentioned earlier that compared Logo users to those using other computer tools, it's worth remembering that while both groups showed improvements in high-level cognitive skills compared to a control group, the Logo users consistently showed the most significant gains, particularly in aspects like divergent production and originality, even when their creations were judged by English teachers who weren't familiar with Logo.
This really emphasizes the idea that these kinds of design-based projects are inherently creative. The outcomes are typically original, they involve a level of complexity, they have a clear purpose, and they are often designed to be useful to others. Through these projects, students are actively and creatively constructing their own knowledge, which can lead to some really profound realizations, like that fourth grader who exclaimed, "Fractions can be put on anything," after designing multiple ways to represent them digitally.
It all ties back to this concept of the classroom as a knowledge-building community, where learning is not just about absorbing information, but about actively participating in a creative process of constructing understanding. Now, let's explore a particularly hands-on and engaging approach, designing with Lego Logo.
Lego Logo. This is a fantastic illustration of where technology meets tangible, physical creation. The anecdote about fourth grader Kevin's initial Lego car project unexpectedly evolving into this ingenious vibration-powered walker is just brilliant.
It really is.
He wasn't simply following a set of instructions. He was constantly experimenting, identifying problems, finding creative solutions, and in the process, learning fundamental engineering concepts like feedback loops and control mechanisms, ultimately culminating in the creation of a line-following robot. He gained a really deep and practical understanding of the entire design process through that iterative, hands-on experience.
It really highlights how Lego Logo can be a particularly promising domain for fostering creativity through technology. It's a space where science and creativity aren't seen as separate subjects, but naturally coexist and mutually reinforce each other. It fosters a sense of autonomy and empowerment in learners, and has even been shown to increase what researchers call inventor-like behaviors in children.
And its applications extend beyond just science and engineering. We've seen children use Lego Logo to create fascinating kinetic and light sculptures, engaging with fundamental artistic design concepts like symmetry, balance, harmony, and rhythm in a very tangible way. One child who initially wasn't interested in a purely science-focused Lego Logo project became completely immersed when they reframed the task as creating a piece of interactive art.
That's fantastic. And even in the realm of music, Logo has shown potential for fostering creativity. It allows individuals who might not have the physical dexterity or formal training to play a traditional musical instrument to still compose and experiment with music. You can create musical compositions that would be impossible for a single performer to execute live, and you can even connect musical performance to visual representations on the screen. Children can manipulate musical elements like pitch, rhythm, and tempo through Logo commands and create surprisingly complex and original melodies.
And there's also a range of other specialized music technology available, some of which even incorporates artificial intelligence, that lowers the initial barriers to entry for experimenting with more advanced musical concepts like harmony. This opens up new avenues for musical exploration and creative expression for a much wider range of individuals.
It really seems that this emphasis on design across these different domains and educational levels provides a powerful framework for nurturing creative thinking. There's even some interesting research suggesting that explicitly focusing on software design in computer science education could foster more creative and integrated thinking patterns in students, similar to those often observed in individuals who excel in fields like music.
Now, looking across all these diverse applications we've explored, it becomes clear that while creative projects could theoretically exist without the use of technology, technology often plays a crucial facilitating role in amplifying and extending those creative possibilities.
Absolutely. Take CSIL, for instance. Its very structure, as a networked and collaborative environment for building knowledge, directly supports the kind of connected and constructive learning that's at the heart of fostering creativity. And the planned future enhancements to CSIL, with even more distinct digital spaces designed for different knowledge building processes and enhanced tools for communication and feedback, will provide even more robust scaffolding for creative collaboration.
And hypermedia authoring tools, with their built-in features that encourage both the construction of ideas and critical reflection on that construction, really empower students to structure their thoughts and present them in more organized and meaningful ways. Plus, let's not forget that computers can be incredibly valuable for managing the sheer complexity that often comes with ambitious creative projects, both for the students undertaking them and for the teachers guiding them.
And as we've seen with programming environments like Logo and the flexibility offered by hypertext languages, the ability for students to design their own representations and interactions, rather than being limited to predefined interfaces, is a key factor in fostering creative expression and problem solving.
That brings us back to that earlier study by Westberg, where Logo actually outperformed even other computer-based tools in fostering creativity. This was attributed to its unique combination of programmability, its multimodal nature allowing for both visual and textual interaction, and its direct support for iterative design processes. It's a good reminder that not all computer programs are created equal when it comes to nurturing creative thought.
And it's so important for educators to be thoughtful in how they integrate technology, avoiding the temptation to just throw a collection of different programs at students without any real coherence or underlying pedagogical framework. Research has actually shown that programming environments like Logo can foster stronger feelings of control and mastery in learners compared to simply being given access to a set of disparate utility programs.
Now, despite all this promising research, it's essential to acknowledge that implementing these kinds of approaches in the classroom can be quite challenging for teachers. Their own knowledge and understanding of how to effectively mediate student learning in these technology-rich environments, how to design engaging and meaningful projects, and how to themselves use these diverse computer design tools is absolutely critical for success.
Mediation in this context isn't just about giving technical instructions on how to use the software. It's about actively helping students to become more aware of the underlying design principles at play, as well as the domain-specific knowledge relevant to their projects. This often involves teachers modeling creative processes themselves, providing individualized coaching as students work through challenges, and working alongside them to explore possibilities. This kind of hands-on guidance can often be much more effective than simply giving verbal instructions.
And of course, teachers need the time, the training, and the access to appropriate resources to make this kind of teaching possible. Some researchers have suggested incorporating shorter, more frequent mini-design projects as a way for students to quickly experience and reflect on the entire design process within a more manageable time frame, which could also help teachers integrate these methods more readily.
So, to bring all these threads together, the research really does offer strong evidence that computers can be powerful catalysts for creativity in a variety of domains. But the key isn't just the technology itself. It's fundamentally about the type of software that's being used and, perhaps even more importantly, the broader educational context in which it's implemented and the active and informed role of the teacher.
And the specific programs we've discussed today, Logo, word processing, and various design tools, are really just illustrative examples. There are other really promising approaches in fields like mathematics and data analysis that we simply didn't have time to delve into in this deep dive.
It's also important to keep in mind that creativity is a multifaceted concept, and different research studies may be focusing on slightly different aspects of it. But whether we understand creativity as the ability to generate novel ideas, as a sophisticated form of problem solving, or as a full and meaningful expression of one's intelligence, the evidence increasingly points towards the computer's potential to have a significant and positive impact.
Ultimately, it all comes back to the curriculum and, crucially, to the teachers, who are the key to unlocking the full potential of technology for nurturing creativity in their students.
And that brings us to our final thought for you today. Given the inherent challenges that educators already face in fostering creativity within traditional educational settings, and considering the research that suggests a decline in creative activity as children progress through their school years, how can we as a society better support our teachers in effectively integrating these powerful computational tools to truly nurture the creative potential that lies within every learner? It's not just about providing the technology, it's about fostering the systemic changes needed to help creativity flourish in this increasingly digital age.